Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world, here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu.
So help me God. So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
In just 6 months since his return to the White House, President Trump's presidency has initiated a tectonic shift in global affairs. Beyond his controversial domestic agenda, Trump has escalated tariff use against allies like Japan, Canada, and the EU, while also threatening adversaries such as China and Russia. He's carefully navigated complex national security and technology issues, including the TikTok ban and advanced semiconductor export controls. In moves that caught many by surprise, his administration has taken decisive action in Iran to deter nuclear ambitions and bolster support for Israel, even amidst its controversial role in Gaza. He has also notably reversed his earlier stance on the Ukraine and Russia war, now providing further weaponry to Ukraine through NATO countries. Furthermore, he has significantly restructured American foreign policy institutions, dismantling USAID, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and some parts of the State Department. Today we're joined by Ambassador John Bolton, a prominent figure known for his hawkish foreign policy views and a staunch supporter of Taiwan. He served under 4 U.S. presidents, most recently as National Security Advisor during Trump's first term. Following his departure, Ambassador Bolton published a critical book about President Trump and has been an outspoken critic of Trump's policies, character, and leadership suitability. It was from Ambassador Bolton's book that the world gained an insight into Trump's real view of Taiwan. Let's hear from Ambassador Bolton.
Welcome, Ambassador Bolton.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be with you.
Well, you recently said that President Trump is an aberration of American political life. However, I think first, people may have believed that during the first election, but he won an even larger margin during the second time. How do you explain that phenomenon to the world? Has America changed?
Well, I think much of the support that Trump received in 2024 was a negative reaction to the Biden administration, particularly on economic policy. The perceived rate of inflation, the danger of more inflation, and also because the voters were dissatisfied with Biden's overall performance, and Vice President Harris obviously was closely tied to the Biden presidency and could not escape it. What they did not vote for were many of the changes that we're seeing, particularly in U.S. foreign policy, whether it's in connection with Ukraine or tariffs, which are now a principal subject of discussion, or a range of other issues. That really wasn't discussed or debated in any kind of coherent way during 2024. And I think much of what's happening, much of what concerns people around the world, really is a reflection more of Donald Trump than where the American people are.
But it sounds like you're saying that President Trump won primarily for perhaps his domestic policies rather than based on his foreign policy.
Yeah, that's almost certainly true, whether it's economic or social policy. The United States is still basically a center-right country, and I think voters rejected what they perceived to be the drift to the left of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party's nominees. So almost entirely, this was an election focused on domestic issues, as most recent American presidential elections have been. It's not like during the Cold War when foreign policy was considered by the voters to be much more important. So that's when you see what look to be significant shifts in American positions on various international issues. That's Donald Trump, not necessarily anything like a majority of the American people.
So if we could, let's start with some of the domestic institutions that Trump cutting funding, international grants, that's affecting a lot of international nonprofit organizations, including the near abolition of USAID, Voice of America, sister organizations, etc. And these institutions really have long represented American values, which is democracy and human rights, to the world. what does that mean for the world when America seems to retreat from its own values that it's been touting and promoting for decades?
Well, if I thought the country were really retreating, I'd be very concerned. But as I say, I don't think that's the case. I think Trump has made a big mistake in the way they've handled the near dismantling of USAID and the what's called the Agency for Global Media, the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Voice of America, and other broadcasting components. Because I think it's, while there's certainly much to reform in that entire universe of organizations, you don't reform it by eliminating it. And so I think it will be built back after having incurred all the cost and damage that was done by dismantling it in the way that it was done, and will end up with the same capabilities, hopefully more focused, more better directed and better managed, and more limited in the scope of what they do to reflect American national interest and not various ideologies from American domestic politics. But it's a setback. It's a reflection, I think, of Trump as an aberration. These activities will cause damage, but I think we will repair it. The problem is that once the damage is done, it takes time to build back up trust and good faith.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger question, whether the damage that's done to American reputation and credibility this time, if that can ever be recovered and how long it will take. We also want to talk about, obviously, the relationship with Europe and the U.S. role in the NATO. There's been rumors that the U.S. may actually withdraw from NATO. What is your view?
I wrote in my book how at the NATO summit in Brussels in 2018, he came very close to withdrawing. He doesn't understand how the alliance works. He basically thinks that we defend Europe, we don't get anything out of it, and the Europeans don't pay for it. So if I thought that was the way NATO worked, I probably wouldn't be in favor of it either. But it's not how it actually operates in practice, which Trump doesn't understand. So I think it's important to take a long-range view here. We don't want to see Trump do any more damage than he has already. Certainly, we don't want to see a withdrawal from NATO, which would be catastrophic for the United States and for the Europeans. And so how the Europeans react to what they're seeing is important. And they've said, some of them have said things that if we're not careful will amount to a permission slip for Trump to withdraw from NATO. So it's not a happy period to go through, but I think people simply have to grit their teeth and say, look, there's a longer time horizon than just Donald Trump's presidency. We have to keep in mind institutions and interests that have persisted for a long time and try and mitigate the damage that's done during his presidency, but have in mind refurbishing these structures once he's gone.
This will be known as the Hague Defense Commitment, which is pretty good, pretty appropriate. When the Allies reach this number, it will add more than $1 trillion a year. Think of that, $1 trillion per year to our common defense. And this is a monument really to victory, but it's a monumental win for the United States because we were carrying much more than our fair share. It was quite unfair, actually. But this is a big win for Europe and for actually Western civilization.
For me, there is absolute clarity that the United States is totally committed to NATO, totally committed to Article 5. And yes, there is also an expectation, which will be fulfilled today, that the Canadians and the Europeans will speed up their spending, making sure that we not only are able to defend ourselves against the Russians and others, but also to equalize. And this is fair, that we spend the same as the US is spending.
Well, related to NATO, obviously, is Russia. I think we've seen that Trump not only praising Putin, but also taking the action to be close to Putin, almost siding with him on the Ukraine and Russia issues. And some justify by saying this is actually a grand strategy shift. This might be a reverse Kissinger moment. And what is your thinking on that?
Well, Trump doesn't do grand strategy. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't have the bandwidth to do grand strategy. He doesn't even really do policy as we understand that term normally. He has said publicly, and I've heard him say privately many times, he thinks international relations are a function of the personal relations of national leaders. So if he has a good personal relationship with Vladimir Putin, which he thinks he does, he thinks they're friends, he thinks therefore the U.S. and Russia have a good relationship. I don't say personal relations have no place in international affairs, of course they do, but when you're dealing with people like Putin or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un, they certainly don't let personal relations get in the way of their pursuit of what they see as their national interest. And that's a big risk, therefore, when Trump has to deal with hard men like that.
We thought we had 4 deals, Howard, right, with Putin. Somehow they end and we get off the phone. Oh, that was a very nice conversation. And then he sends missiles into buildings someplace. I say, what was that all about? So anyway, so we're going to be doing that with NATO, and it's fully approved, fully done. We'll send them a lot of weapons of all kinds, and they're going to deliver those weapons immediately to the site.
Well, since you mentioned Xi Jinping, we have to talk about China. What do you think will be the U.S.-China relations under Trump 2.0?
You know, it's hard to predict at this point. Trump was very critical of China during the 2024 campaign because he largely believes that due to COVID, China cost him the 2020 election. And his logic actually has, I think, a grounding in reality. The economy was pretty good at the beginning of 2020. It looked like Trump would be reelected. But the obvious effects of the pandemic in the U.S. and around the world changed all that, sent the economy down significantly, and it hadn't fully recovered by Election Day. So Trump thinks if COVID had never arrived, that he would have been reelected. And I'm not saying he believes that Beijing deliberately unleashed COVID, but it's clear it came from somewhere in Wuhan, probably the sophisticated biological research facility there, and he thinks that's China's fault. So he has been very critical. On the other hand, as he showed during the first term, he would love to cut a huge trade deal with Beijing. He'd love to have the biggest trade deal in history. And
what would that look like? What does that mean, the biggest trade deal?
In the first term, what the trade negotiators had in mind was getting rid of a lot of Chinese practices that in the industrial democracies do not pursue in the trade relations they have through the World Trade Organization. So he wanted to stop China's theft of intellectual property, which they've been stealing from the U.S., the European Union, Britain, Canada, Japan, you name it. He wanted that eliminated. He wanted the mercantilist policies that China pursues through the Belt and Road Initiative by discriminating against foreign investors and traders in China, and a range of other things stopped. He wanted to see companies like Huawei and ZTE not be instruments of the Chinese state, but just be ordinary telecommunications companies. And while there seemed to be some initial progress on that in the negotiations, ultimately it all fell apart. So whether you can get those negotiations really started again in a significant way, and if there's any chance that China, in exchange for better access to American markets and things like that, will give up what for several decades has now been a very successful business model for Beijing, remains to be seen. But it's the fascination with this huge trade deal that attracts Trump, because he wrote the book and he thinks he ought to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think what concerns Taiwan the most is obviously Trump's interest in making a deal with China as well. Taiwan is very concerned that it may be on the negotiation table. What do you think?
Yeah, he doesn't know much about Taiwan. He doesn't know much about anything internationally, but he knows China's a big country, and he likes Xi Jinping. I think he envies the authoritarian leaders. He has more trouble with democratically elected leaders. But there is reason to be concerned in Taiwan. I think the negotiations over Ukraine help demonstrate that, because I believe Beijing is watching very carefully how Trump handles Ukraine. And I think if they see that the United States is essentially prepared to abandon a country in Central Europe that was the victim of unprovoked aggression, that we're probably not going to stand with Taiwan or others in East Asia or Southeast Asia that China may have designs on. So it's a very important period. There's a big debate still within the Republican Party. Contrary to what some in the media say, Trump does not control the party to do everything that he wants. He's an intimidating figure, but there are many people who are quite concerned about it, and obviously in the Democratic Party as well. So a lot of this remains to be fought out, and it's important to explain to Trump why Taiwan has enormous value and importance to the United States, quite apart from the semiconductor chip manufacturing industry.
Right. And what would be your advice to Taiwan? Because I think Taiwan is trying to figure out, as many other countries, how to really approach Trump and how to demonstrate its own value.
Well, I think it's several things that could be done to try and get through to Trump. Number one, I think Taiwan should be looking at a significant increase in its defense expenditures. There's a storyline by some people in Washington that Taiwan thinks it can just sit back and rely on the United States. It's not spending enough on defense. It's not serious enough. I don't think that's the case, but I think just as we saw Prime Minister Kishida of Japan, when he was still in office, pledged to double Japan's defense budget from 1% to 2% of GDP over a 5-year period, Taiwan needs to make comparable or even greater shifts in defense spending, at least to get up to NATO commitment levels and beyond. Trump said during the campaign he thought NATO members should spend 5% of GDP on defense, which for the U.S. would put us back at Reagan-era levels roughly, and I think that's appropriate in a dangerous world. But Taiwan needs to demonstrate, and I think it can and it will, that it's fully prepared to take the lead in getting its defenses in a position where they act as a real deterrent to China. And I think we need to focus on that question of deterrence. Nobody wants the war. But, Donald Rumsfeld, the former U.S. Secretary of State, once said, it's not American strength that's provocative, it's American weakness that's provocative. So we need massive increases in the Navy. We have to be able to show to Beijing that if they try to put a blockade around Taiwan, we're prepared to break it. I honestly don't think China wants to invade Taiwan. I think it would be too costly for them, too risky across 100 miles of the Taiwan Strait. And they don't want to destroy Taiwan's enormous productive capabilities, not just in the chip industry, but in so many others. What they'd like is to show that the U.S. and its allies are not willing to come to Taiwan's side, as I say, in the case of a blockade, and then they think the island will fall to them very easily. So we've got not much time to prepare. We're probably all late in what we're doing, but it's important to explain to Trump why it's in his interest not to suffer a defeat that would be represented by China taking over Taiwan. He's not so concerned with Taiwan's national security. He's not even really interested in U.S. national security. He's interested in Donald Trump. And he has to be convinced that his personal reputation is on the line here if he's responsible in his administration for the loss of Taiwan.
I'm personally pleased to hear that you don't think China is actually interested in invading Taiwan, even though that's been, around the streets in Washington, D.C. for quite a few years. We have very limited time, but wanted to get your sense where the world is headed. A French parliamentarian gave remarks that went viral in the world. He basically said, now the superpowers or the powers are splitting the world. So the U.S. will take Greenland, Panama, Canada, Russia will take the Baltics as well as Ukraine, and then China will take Taiwan and South China Sea. So we're returning to rule of jungle kind of world.
Parce que la vision trumpienne coïncide avec celle de Poutine. Un retour aux sphères d'influence, les grandes puissances dictant le sort des petits pays. À moi, le Groenland, le Panama et le Canada. À toi, l'Ukraine, les pays baltes et l'Europe de l'Est. À lui, Taïwan et la mer de Chine. On appelle cela, dans les soirées des oligarques du golfe de Mar-a-Lago, le réalisme diplomatique. Nous sommes donc seuls.
Do you agree with that?
No, I think that's ridiculous. The United States is not going to take Panama, Canada, and Greenland. And hopefully, if NATO sticks together, the Russians don't get the Baltics. But the threat to Taiwan is serious. The blockade can be just as dangerous as the invasion because it could give China what it wants at a much lower cost, many fewer casualties, and as I say, not destroying Taiwan's productive capability. So that's why it needs to be a priority. But it's important that I think Taiwan continue to reach out to other countries in East and Southeast Asia and around the world to continue what for many years has been its very effective ability to meet with the U.S. Congress and tell Taiwan's story and to continue to try and talk to Trump's top advisors. It is a very dangerous period in a lot of parts in the world, particularly in along China's Indo-Pacific periphery.
Well, does Trump represent America?
Well, look, he's the president, so there's no doubt that his policies will be pursued. But I think it's important to think long term, and things may happen that will change his mind or divert his attention. It's important not to say that there's been a fundamental shift in America because, as I said earlier, I do not think that there's been a fundamental change in where the vast majority of the American people really are.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton. Always good to have you.
Well, glad to be with you.
Thank you for watching Season 1 of DC Insiders by Taiwan Plus. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. Taiwan's growing technological, economic, and strategic significance, in addition to its position as a key frontier in the US-China competition for influence, has brought increasing global attention to this island nation of 23 million people. Many global decisions affecting Taiwan are made here in Washington, D.C., and developments in Taiwan have profound consequences for the region and the world. The unique and robust relationship between Taiwan and the U.S., unlike any other formal state-to-state relationship, is consequential to the U.S.-China relations shaping the 21st century.
You can now endanger the U.S. sea-based lines of communications to Japan, to Korea, to the Philippines, and push the United States military all the way out to Hawaii and really establish a hegemonic position in East Asia. So for those reasons, China wants Taiwan.
Through in-depth conversations with the individuals shaping these policies, DC Insiders brings you Taiwan's perspective that is essential to these vital discussions. Our goal is to amplify Taiwan's voice in dialogues concerning issues that matter not only to Taiwan, but also to the broader region and our interconnected world. Season 1 features a diverse range of experts and policymakers, from think tanks to the business sector. We tackle challenging questions, such as the potential erosion of democracy, press freedom, and American soft power during Trump's second administration.
Just practically, if we pull the rug out from this stuff, very few countries can fill that void. China's one of them who might. This is soft power of America that's being lost, and the Chinese may try to play.
For years, we were seen as that country that people wanted to come to. My own parents came here in the 60s for graduate school from Taiwan. Because they wanted to get the opportunities that it was seen that only America could afford. They wanted to bring up their kids in that environment, and I think that will change.
We explore Trump's policies aimed at fostering innovation in emerging technologies and integrating them into the defense industry. We also analyze the effectiveness of tariffs as a tool to address trade deficits and achieve Trump's goal of reindustrializing America.
So Taiwan is a great partner in this, if it chooses to be. The challenge, though, is all that expertise are in Taiwanese companies that have huge business in mainland China. And so if Foxconn or Pegatron or Quanta want to help in this, then the Chinese government is going to say, what are you doing? You've got your factories in mainland.
More fundamentally, we wanted to understand President Trump, an unconventional leader, his thinking, tactics, politics, and the philosophy underpinning his policies.
Look at the policies that came out of the Trump administration. Look at the revision of the contact guidelines that allowed Taiwan, for the first time since 1979, to have a more robust diplomatic presence in Washington. Look at all of the things that came out of the State Department to normalize our relationship with Taiwan.
Taiwan has many friends in Washington, and more than the executive branch, the legislative branch, the Congress is full of friends of Taiwan.
Yeah.
And indeed, there are dozens, perhaps even hundreds of congressmen who feel it's their special duty to watch out for Taiwan. Never underestimate Taiwan's strength in the Washington policy scene.
Our guests, representing Democratic, Republican, and independent viewpoints, provided balanced perspectives for your informed understanding. Are the new rounds of tariffs set as announced by Trump in July and August? How will the war between Ukraine and Russia end? And will Trump change his friendliness with Putin? Will Trump visit China in the fall this year? Will TikTok get sold? Will export controls strengthen or loosen? On behalf of the entire Taiwan Plus team, thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media for the full Season 1. We welcome your feedback and look forward to bringing you even better content and conversations in Season 2. See you again soon.